Hello, one and all, to Press Play Action here on Jersey Nerds Productions. Mitchell Lea alongside Brandon Sue and Tommy Grant. And guys, I know it's been a minute since our last Press Play Action recording because Brandon got into the thick of baseball season and I started a new job. So things got a little bit hectic and out of control, but
And I'm here for the ride.
What was that?
And I'm here for the ride.
Yeah, he's
Basically, yeah. So we're going to try something a little bit different here. And we're still going to do plenty of movie talk, and I'm hoping to do something a little bit more regularly with just kind of the random stuff that I watch and kind of keeping like a diary of sorts. An audio diary, as the kids would say. I don't know any kids that say that. I also don't know any kids. You know, I don't spend time with children, but it is spooky season. As I do think the kids say that it's spooky season. I think the adults say that too. Yeah.
Hashtag spooky. Yeah.
September 1st is the official start of spooky season for me.
Exactly. Yeah. September 1st to October 31st. And that means horror movies. And we've kind of already been in the vibe for that with the Stranger Things. We've referenced a lot of the 70s and 80s movies that they're either paying homage to or it kind of has a similar vibe of something like that. And or in some cases, you know, actors from those movies that are involved. I just watched Aliens for the first time ever a few weeks ago, and it's now one of my all-time favorite movies, and it's got Paul Reiser, who is in Stranger Things as one of the doctors. I think either a doctor or a cop. He's a very intermittent role, so I just know kind of he's a man.
We lost Mitchell.
I think
he'll come back in. This is like a curse we tend to have. We usually have a recording or two, and he always loses connection. And he's back.
We're good. He's back. Oof. I thought we were in the upside down for a second.
So is this a whole new recording or what?
No,
nope, we're still alive.
I think we're still going.
All right. Well, hey,
let's keep it in. Let's keep it in.
They didn't want me talking about. They didn't want me talking about Paul Reiser, who also, by the way, in Whiplash, another one of my all-time favorite movies. Just put this guy in
FYI,
for a little bit.
Coming back to theaters.
But I don't know what. I haven't seen any place have showtimes for it or anything.
I haven't either, but I've seen tweets where it says September 20th. So mark your calendars.
I'd love to mark my calendar, but give me a showtime and a theater to go see it at because I will be there as soon as I can.
If it's in Dolby, I feel like we have to make the move.
Yes, yeah, we'll have to do it regardless. They could be playing it on a shoebox, and I'd be like, all right, hey, let's go watch Whiplash on a shoebox. Be the greatest movie to see on a shoebox.
Let me pull it up right now. But go ahead, keep going.
It's spooky season, and I am, as Tommy knows, notorious for not having seen movies from 70s, 80s. I mean, I just saw Aliens for the first time 3 weeks ago. So, yeah, that's a good example right there. Oh, Oh, yes, the Whiplash 10th anniversary. Yeah, that's happening. Yep, absolutely.
I would caveat that in that you haven't seen horror or sci-fi from that period.
Well, because
the classic movies, but
for a while I had this thing that I was afflicted with for a little bit. It's called being a giant bitch, in that I would not see horror movies even when I got really into movies until about 2016 was when the first horror movie I ever saw in theaters was The Conjuring 2. And since I had a good
interesting choice.
Yeah.
It was a good choice. I really like that movie. But once I saw that, I was like, you know what? I actually like these horror movies. That movie just won over a whole genre for me. So once I started opening myself up to that, I had to get caught up with just seeing horror movies in general. And now I really have to go back and watch stuff from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Yes. And no time like the present.
Hey, well, I was gonna say, in some of those movies, it feels like they didn't give two Fs about what's going on. They didn't. They were all for like the slasher films, like killing people on screen and stuff. But maybe I'm wrong about that. at the end of the day, I'm with you, Mitchell. I'm not the biggest I'm very scared of horror movies sometimes in terms of just like sometimes I'll plug my ears because I'm like, oh, I don't want to hear it.
That means
But I like the
that means they're
movies.
doing the job.
I Right, that means they're doing a great job, and I like the way my heart rate goes up. Mitchell can attest to this. I'm a huge jump scare person. Like everything makes me jump scare. So imagine when they actually put a jump scare in, it gets me most of the times. But yeah, no, I've started getting into horror movies probably around the same time Mitchell did, probably like 2017, 2018 was when I really got into them, and I started going and seeing like a lot of them. So just seeing like movies recently, like I don't even know if Blink Twice would be considered a horror movie, but I wouldn't have seen like a thriller like that until recently. And now I'm like, oh yeah, that movie doesn't phase me at all. Like let's go ahead and dive in. Or The First Omen, we can talk about, horror movies we saw earlier this year, but like The First Omen's like a pretty good one. Late Night with
Yeah.
the Devil is like a movie I would have never saw
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
5 years ago, and now I'm like, yeah, I want to see Late Night with the Devil, as much as possible.
Have you heard of Late Night with the Devil, Tommy?
I have. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen a lot of the new movies because since having a child,
Child.
I have not been able to go to the theaters.
Yeah,
So I am very behind until it comes out on streaming. So I have not watched that yet.
I,
It's one of the best I've seen this year easily.
Really?
And do you know
Best
the
horror
premise
or
of it?
best movie?
It's the best horror
both.
movie. Yeah, it's the best horror movie and there's been a lot of good horror movies. There have also been a lot of dog shit horror movies, but there have been a lot of good horror movies. Like The First Omen, like you mentioned, was very good. Late Night with the Devil was fantastic. I've heard really good things about Immaculate, but I haven't seen Immaculate just yet.
Same.
Okay.
I'm sure there are a few. I had a lot of fun with Abigail. Abigail was a good time. I know a
That's
lot of
on
people that
Peacock,
really.
I believe. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yes, that's on
That,
Peacock
that's
now
on
as well.
my watch list. I haven't watched any recent horror movies that came on streaming because I was waiting for spooky season. So now I'll
Yeah.
start diving in.
No time
Uh,
like the present, like
But
Mitchell
Late
said.
Night with the Devil is about a late night TV show host, and his ratings are kind of falling a little bit.
He's
So
battling Carson, right? Yeah, Carson.
yeah, so it's in the 70s. So he's like, you know what? It's Halloween in 1977. So we are just going to lean into Halloween. We're going to have like someone that can talk to spirits, and we're going to have this possessed girl on and have an exorcism on this late night talk show. And then things just keep going wrong. And it's
I
a
like it.
fascinating movie. I loved it. The only movie I've liked better so far this year is Dune 2, and I mean I love that movie more than my mom, so I don't, but it's
How dare you
close.
say that about your mother?
My mom's great, but my mom is not Timothy
He's not
Chalamet's
driving
PhD
to New
Fremen.
York to see his mom in 70
Yeah.
millimeter.
M-
IMAX?
my mom isn't cinematographer Greg Fraser, but love you, mom. You're the best, just not at cinematography.
Not Mrs.
But
Lee.
I have an entire. She ain't listen to this. This is about horror movies. She doesn't give a damn about horror movies. That I promise. I Am Legend was too scary for her. So
fair.
no. I have an entire list of. I have 40 movies on a list, and I'm not going to talk about all of them,
Okay.
because some of them are just franchises. Like for example, I have Halloween. There's like 20 damn Halloween movies of varying quality,
Yes.
but I haven't seen any Halloween movies other than the 3 most recent ones with Jamie Lee Curtis.
Right.
And I actually like the first 2 of those quite a bit, but it ended on such a bad note.
So
It
it's
seemed like they were forcing it, right? Like the third one, it was forced. It was just
They just had no good ideas. It's like, hey, let's just focus on this other guy. And it's like, who the hell cares
Yeah.
about you?
I wasn't a huge fan with the most recent trilogy for Halloween movies, and to your point, that the '80s slasher movies are probably most infamously known for their success despite their low budget. They're very creative with how they do their cinematography. The Halloween franchise, at least Halloween 1 and 2, kind of broke a lot of records, made new designs. They were the one that made the first person shot
Mhm.
Yep.
on this point
The
of view.
POV. Yeah, the POV. Yeah.
And they kind of became like the X-Men movies where they played with time, and then they started making remakes that were set in the same universe but somehow on a different timeline.
And then
It
he
got
was
very
going,
confusing because
yeah.
they had so many fucking sequels that I still cannot figure out how all the Halloween movies are connected. Because
So I always get like confused by Halloween and Nightmare. Is it Nightmare on Elm?
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, I always get confused by those two. But I've obviously seen Halloween, but like to your point, like at some point they like go to space. They're just like, yeah,
No,
like
that is.
am I
Let's just
am
go
I
ahead and dive into the
sorry?
just
Am I?
the
Oh,
slasher
Friday the
genre as
13th. Friday the
yeah.
13th is that one. Okay, yeah.
Jason
See
X
what I
is the
mean?
one where he goes to space.
See what I mean?
Yes.
So Halloween is like playing with time, and then Friday the 13th is just like fuck it, like let's just do everything, like let's just put Jason everywhere. And so yeah, I'm kind of with you. I like those movies. I like the Halloween movies, and like the last three, like whatever. But I'm just craving like a good horror like franchise to kind of like come back to the universe. Is kind of what I was getting at with
well,
that. But
it's hard. It's hard to come back to the universe now because the Halloween franchise has 13 films currently,
right,
Yeah.
and there are basically three Halloween twos. So at that
that
point, it's just
sounds like
so,
Fast and Furious, but
yeah,
way more complicated. Yeah.
it's so convoluted. But at the end of the day, the main character that is kind of the key role to the entire franchise, besides Michael Myers, is Jamie Lee Curtis. She's basically infamously known now as the Scream Queen because she is like the final girl that everybody knows and loves, and she's
Yeah, she's
related
the
but
final girl.
not related to Michael Myers throughout these movies. It's an interesting relationship they try to build on.
Well, as
So,
far as
what movies
sorry,
do? So I was just gonna say, like, what franchise do y'all like better? Do you like Friday the 13th or Halloween?
I haven't
I
seen any of those. So, like, I have Friday the 13th as a franchise on this list. Same with the Nightmare on Elm Street
Yeah.
and Halloween. So those are all three that have tons of movies in that franchise.
okay.
Black Christmas is another horror movie that I've heard
Yeah.
from the 70s.
I've
They
heard
got
it's
a
pretty good.
remake in '06 that I
I was
heard
just say
was
I've
okay, and a
yeah
remake in 2019 that I heard is like cinematic diarrhea. So not very strong. But there's also a lot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, and I haven't seen the original one, but I've heard a lot of people say that two is better than one. So I gotta check out both of those. The Jessica Biel remake in 2003 that I heard was really good.
oh that's right.
Yeah, I feel like
But
Texas Chainsaw is like one of those. Like when I was picturing like slasher films in like the 80s or whatever, like that was what I was picturing. Was like, oh, they just like
yeah,
low budget, but like we're gonna make this like gory as
Yeah.
we possibly can. Yeah,
So the infamous slasher franchises that are probably the most well known everywhere you go is obviously the Halloween films, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. Then you have Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You also have the Chucky films
yeah. Yep.
that were big in the late 80s, early 90s. And
There's like a Chucky TV show now, isn't
yep,
there?
yeah,
Yeah.
they kind of
yeah.
got revitalized recently. But yeah, those are kind of like the main ones that I think of. Texas Chainsaw, I've actually never seen those because it just never interested me.
Yeah, yeah.
But Friday the 13th was good, but I would definitely say Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street was always my favorite.
Okay.
That one it's a different kind of horror because most of these, like Chucky deals with possession. I'm assuming you guys haven't seen the Chucky films.
I've
No.
seen one of them, but yeah, they're
The
interesting.
essential concept of it is it's kind of like Annabelle from the Conjuring movies, where
Actually, I
it's
have seen. I saw the most recent one that came
okay,
out like 5 years ago. It was fine.
yeah. Basically, it's a serial killer's spirit in possessing a doll.
Yep.
It's essentially what Chucky is. Whereas Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees are these creatures that are supposed to be pure evil. Even though they start as normal human beings, they somehow migrate into the pure evil realm. and they just can't be killed. They can be
Yeah.
killed, but they always somehow manage to come back in some crazy, weird, twisted way. But Nightmare on Elm Street was always the unique one for me, where it's the spirit of someone who was killed, but he comes back in your dreams. But what happens in your dreams also happen in real life.
Mm.
He's just like, he can't be touched unless you're in your dream and you fight back in your dream. That's kind of a concept that they take in those movies, is basically battling him in their dreams, which is very weird to think about. So a lot of times you'll have deaths that can't be explained because nobody was in the room, but yet the person's like shredded to pieces because they were killed in their dream by.
I saw the remake about 10 or that came out about 15 years ago, and that was awful. But I've heard really good things about the original, so
Yeah.
I'll definitely have to check that out. That's that whole franchise is on the list. My Bloody Valentine is another slasher movie. Came out in about the early 80s. It got a remake in
Okay.
2009, and I've heard both are pretty fun slasher movies. I mean, this is about just
I
a guy that uh a group of young adults decide to throw a Valentine's Day party only to incur the vengeful wrath of a maniac in mining gear who begins
Oh,
a
that was
killing
a
spree.
terrible movie.
yeah. Well,
It's on the
but
list,
Mitchell.
but
I have to say though, that is the fun part about horror movies, especially the slasher.
Right.
You can't expect them to be great because they're usually low budget and it's just kind of a shits and
But
giggles.
when they are great,
And when they are
they're a lot
great,
of fun.
they're a lot of fun to watch, especially if you're just with friends, you're having a couple of drinks, relaxing, and just watching a horror movie for fun. Like it's definitely more fun to watch with other
so
people.
yeah, no, exactly. I will say I'll mention this because we're bringing up the slasher films. There was a slasher film this year that came out. I don't know if you saw this, Mitchell. In a Violent Nature
No, I
is
didn't see
like
that.
very interesting slasher film, and some of the stuff they do from like the POV like shots or whatever from like the killer's perspective is like really cool, and some of the kills are like very gruesome. Like I don't know how they came up with the idea of the kill for some of them, but then it ends on such a poor note and such a terrible monologue and like this random truck that I almost don't want to recommend it to people. I would almost say watch the entire movie until the last 15 minutes and then turn it off. Like that's kind of where I was at with it. But yeah, that's just another throw out of like if that movie ends up being on some place, you could check it out as like a slasher film. But yeah, I'm with you. When a slasher film is done right, it's really really good. But I think a lot of them tend to it can stray into the bad territory very quickly,
Yeah,
which I think is the fine line that you walk when you're doing like a slasher film.
and horror movies, it's everybody kind of knows, especially from a cinematography standpoint, it's all about the atmosphere you're in.
But
Which is why a lot of people always say that horror movies are best watched in theaters because you're in a dark room, but you're still surrounded by other people. You see people's reactions. You just have that like kind of weird vibe the whole time you're there. It's just like your anxiety's so high, but it's so much fun.
that was like last year, Mitchell, when Talk to Me was out in theaters. I
I
went and
didn't see.
saw that
Oh,
in like a pretty good crowded theater, and there were some people that were like, "Oh shit! Like you can't do
Yeah,
that happened." It's like
it's
that, and
just
it's
see,
like,
I
you
saw
can't
that
help
in an
but laugh
empty
at other
theater.
people. It's just everybody's scared of different things, and everybody gets
right,
jump scared by different things.
right,
But then you have the people like me who also watch them at 2 o'clock in the morning in the basement where it's pitch black, and you just have the oh shit, now I have to go upstairs, and you feel like someone's following you the whole time.
right.
And like one of the most memorable things I have is The Exorcism of Emily Rose is a good
That's
possession
on the
movie.
list as well.
It's a
Mhm.
good one, and I was definitely in high school. I remember my dad was working the night shift, and one of the things that happened in the movie was everything would happen at 2:59, turning 3 o'clock in the morning. Everything happened, and I fell asleep after watching it, and I woke up, and it was 2:59. Immediately, my dad was also getting ready for work. So next thing you know, I hear footsteps coming down the hall at 2:59, and I'm sitting there having a fucking panic attack. And I just remember my dad walking into the room. I threw my fucking pillow at him and started yelling at him. He's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" I was like, "I thought you were a demon." He's like,
Yeah.
I
Nope,
was like,
not a demon.
No, not a
but
demon.
it's just like it's just something about horror movies. It's just it gets the it's the
Yeah.
adrenaline rush without having to go and do anything.
But yeah, it's like an adrenaline rush while just sitting there. And yeah, I think that's the appeal. Is like that's why people that's why people are into it. I will say, and then you get into like the horror thriller like genre where a lot of thrillers will like promote themselves as horror movies to get the
Yeah,
horror crowd into it.
I mean,
But like
thrillers
at the end of the
are
day,
like
it's not really a horror movie. It's more of like a thriller.
yeah.
We see
I've
that a
always
lot with
taken
movies.
thrillers as kind of the subgenre to horror.
Yeah, that's a good
Kind
point.
of came out of like the '90s because you have like Silence of the Lambs where it has a horror vibe to it.
Yeah. I was gonna say like recently, like Long Legs would be in that category. Like
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I know
that's a good one.
Longlegs was kind of inspired by Silence of the
yeah,
Silence of
Lambs.
the
A lot
Silence
of
of
people
the
Lambs,
Lambs,
consider
very
it a
strong.
Seven.
sequel
Yeah,
in terms.
Seven. Yeah, kind of a Seven vibe. Yeah, exactly.
I wasn't quite done with the slashers because the '90s had those Kevin Williamson written slashers,
Oh yeah.
like the Scream movies,
Oh,
which I'm not a
that is
very
my
big fan of the
favorite.
Scream movies, but well,
I mean, that's okay. Well, have you seen all of them, or just
the only one I haven't seen is Scream 2. I've seen all the others, but I
That's
haven't seen
kind of
Scream
crazy.
2.
because that's another one
Yeah,
where they were
Taking
big
long
in
to
the
come out.
'90s, and then they just came back recently, where they just came out with the whole
yeah.
new trilogy, which
I
I
actually liked the most recent one. The most recent one I thought because it's not in Woodsboro, it's in New York City, and so it just felt
haven't
like
seen that one yet.
they were doing something a little bit different with that,
Okay,
and it wasn't just kind of the same old retread.
Yeah.
There's also I Know What You Did Last Summer, which I haven't seen, but I heard is like a good like campy like '90s slasher type movie.
Ooh,
Um,
Well, may I throw out the best horror movie of all time on my list?
I wonder if we have the
That
same
that
one.
makes
might be a
fun
hot
of
take, but
that
yeah,
makes fun of horror movies in like an interesting way.
Are you
Um,
going with
Cabin in
not
the
my?
Woods.
I was just about to mention that.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite horror movie of all time, but that is such a fun, like
it is.
making fun of horror movies type of movie. I
Yeah.
love it.
Well,
Yeah.
that was what Scream was supposed to be. Scream was supposed to, when it first came out, was supposed to be a spoof on horror movies, and they obviously went more down the horror aspect, but still kind of threw a little bit. I mean, when you have Shaggy as one of the main villains, I mean, he was phenomenal in that role. I loved him in that movie. You know, despite what you might think about the Scream movies, Mitchell, I definitely loved the first Scream. The rest are okay, but the first was definitely the best.
I need to rewatch it. It's been some time. I remember not just not liking it, but hating the
Mhm.
first Scream. But I mean, I've got to go back to it.
I mean, that
Um,
could be a fun one to add to the list of movies we got to watch because
it's on there.
I feel like we'll have a good conversation with that one.
I've got a bunch of 70. I've got stuff like the Exorcist. I've never
Yep.
seen the first Exorcist.
Okay,
I saw the most recent one and I
The
hated
most
it.
recent one is in.
It's awful.
So the Exorcist, the original Exorcist from I think '78 or '79.
I think it's 72.
Is it that?
It's 70.
I think they made
uh,
one in like
73,
78, right? Is that what it is? It was 73.
Yeah.
71.
Hmm.
So all
But
right,
didn't they make one like very shortly after that?
yeah,
like,
they did make a
later or
sequel, but
something? Yeah, yeah.
the original Exorcist movie is infamously known in the horrorverse as the scariest horror movie ever made. Could be argued, obviously, you might not be scared by that kind of stuff, but it's kind of like that infamous, like everybody knows The Exorcist. It's one of the scariest movies made. There's a lot of lore to the film set and cast and things that happen to the cast during filming that we can definitely talk about another time. But The Exorcist is definitely one we will have to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't talk about horror movies and not watch, what sparked kind of your supernatural horror, possession horror genre of horror.
I've got Carrie on there as well from the 70s.
Okay.
That's another one. Saw the remake and it was fine, but I've heard really good things about the original. Brandon was talking about this one earlier, the first Omen. Well, we've got the actual first
Yeah,
Omen,
the
the
actual-
Omen back in the 70s. That the first Omen made me really want to watch that one because I loved the first Omen. That was such a unexpectedly good movie.
Yeah, I would
Uh
agree with that.
Suspiria, that's another one. I saw the remake and it kind of bored me to tears, if I'm being honest.
I don't think
But
I've seen that one.
In terms of like lost footage stuff as well, like
Blair Witch,
yeah, Blair Witch is a good
Blair
one.
Witch is kind of what kicked the that genre
Kicked it
off.
all off. Well, there was.
Paranormal Activity is kind of what made it a
I
staple.
don't. Yeah, I don't want to speak out of turn, Mitchell, but isn't there a movie in like the 80s or 70s that like kind of kicked all that off, but it was so like off-putting and offensive that like people kind of
I
stopped doing
I
it?
I don't
I'm
know.
trying. It was about cannibals. Am I?
I'm sure there was, but it's also
Yeah.
that's probably also not a movie I have any interest in watching,
No,
if I'm
that's
being
fair.
honest.
I'll have to search more into this, but but yeah, basically my point with it is like there's so much different genres you can go with in like horror
Yeah.
movies, and that's kind of like the best thing about it. And now that I think about it, I think it's Cannibal Holocaust is what I'm thinking of,
Yeah.
where it's like the number
Yes,
one
I
like
have heard of
cannibal
that.
movie
Yeah.
ever, and people are like, "Oh, this movie was like sick," because people thought it was like real because they never seen like
Yes.
a lost footage type of movie before, so they
Well,
all thought
I
it was
think
like a real
the
thing.
director was even arrested, wasn't he? Because everybody
Yeah,
thought
he
that
was
he
arrested.
basically
Yeah,
filmed
they
murder.
they also had the actors sign like an NDA, like they couldn't like leave their house, like they couldn't like go into public, so people like thought they were actually dead. So it was like yeah, so it was like this huge like kickoff for like the lost footage stuff, and I think it kind of stopped it for a little bit, and then it got picked back up by the Blair Witch
Now,
Project, obviously
I know
now.
you guys are big on doing films, following directors and doing groups of films by directors.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you guys? What's your take on Shyamalan?
Hmm.
We have
I,
talked a
I know,
little bit about
We love
Shyamalan.
I know you guys have
we
covered
have a
some.
love hate relationship with M Night.
Yeah.
Right.
And I
We
just
have a
saw a
love-hate.
Shyamalan movie recently in Trap that there were parts of it I loved and hated in that one. So it very up and down.
And you
So,
know, trap is like in the thriller, like horror, like
well,
Yeah.
serial killer
Shyamalan.
type of thing.
Speaking of lost footage, Shyamalan did do a lost footage horror movie called The Visit in 2015,
Oh,
Oh, I've
I've
seen
never
that.
seen the visit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't
or
really like
found
that one.
footage, whatever you want to call it. I mean,
yeah, the found footage. Yeah,
Yeah.
that one was an interesting one.
yeah, but then like, and then it goes deeper into where where do you cut off like horror movie like genre like line like where does it end?
That,
Because you can get to a lot of like you were saying earlier like the subgenres. So yeah, it's just
there really
there's
is
no
no end.
like there is no end, and that's why Mitchell has a 40 movie list like of
Yeah,
movies.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like I've
one
got
of the
stuff like
least,
Dawn of the Dead on here, or An American Werewolf in London, or
or
uh,
another great franchise that also sparked the '80s, the Evil Dead franchise.
I was
Evil
just about to
Dead.
talk about
Well,
that as well
the
because
newest
I've
Evil
seen
Dead is awesome.
those are the only ones I feel like where I can say the new ones that are really fun. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed both of the Evil Dead movies that have come out in the
I've
last
only seen
10,
the
15 years.
original and the newest one, and the newest
And the
one,
newest one, yeah,
ooh,
yeah, that was a good one.
that was intense.
Yeah, it's really good. I've got Candyman on here. I've
Yeah, I
I
ended up not seeing it,
It's
but I
very
heard
well
good
known,
things.
but I've not seen that one either.
That
um
was recent, right? That's like within the last 3 years.
There's a remake.
there's a
Oh,
remake.
there's a remake. Okay.
Yeah, and that one was fine. My favorite horror movie of all time is The Shining.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
well,
think that's just the
I-
that's like
standard for me
towing.
personally.
That's like towing the hard
So,
genre
hot
line. Is
take
kind of what I
is
would say.
it's more of a supernatural type horror movie.
Right. So I think it's
Um,
like towing the line, really.
I
is what
think
I'm saying.
cinematography, it's one of the greatest horror movies made.
Yeah.
In terms of scares, it's definitely not anything scary. It's a very slow movie for me, but I do love it. It's a
It's a
fun watch. But
It's a
What
really
would you
slow
can
burn with an iconic scene where you're like, wow, that guy is like snapped, like he's lost
yeah,
it. Like he's a sociopath. Yeah, yeah.
what
it,
would you consider something like Final Destination movies?
That's more like, see, this is where we're like towing
there's
the
so many
line of like,
subgenres.
is
Yeah.
it horror or is it like something
So
else?
for me,
Because
that's
for me, Final Destination and Saw are more like torture
Well, that is a
You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Yeah.
it's
I
called
like the
torture.
first Saw,
They
but
call it
after
torture
that,
porn is the subgenre for it.
Right, is what the subgenre is. But
Um,
like, I mean, a
I,
Final Destination would be like the curse genre
yeah, I definitely wouldn't call it
of
torture porn
horror.
because maybe it's almost like Final Survivor, which is kind of the whole point of it. But
Right. I mean, it's basically like here's a curse, and like you can't escape death is like kind of like the idea. So
yeah,
like, I mean, we saw a movie recently in the last 3 or 4 years, Mitchell, that was kind of in the same realm, like Truth or Dare, and then also we saw another movie that was made by Blumhouse that was like the exact same like idea. It was like, oh, you can't escape death or whatever.
Blumhouse has done a lot of great work, and they're definitely one of the best, I would say, horror production companies
Yeah,
there.
I will agree with that, but then they have like their ups and downs. Where I was
Yeah,
joking with Mitchell earlier, like this month, I was like, "Well, you know, if Blumhouse has two horror movies coming out at the same time, one has to be good and the other one has to be dog shit because it can't
yeah.
be. Yeah, it
Well,
can't.
Blumhouse has completely dropped the ball because I remember 2017 they made Split, and Split was back to Shyamalan was a really enjoyable movie.
yep.
Get Out is one of my favorite horror movies. I absolutely love
Yeah.
that. And then they made something like if I was to recommend a starter horror movie, something to just kind of get you into horror movies, I think Happy Death Day is a really
Oh,
good choice for
that's a
something
good
like
one.
that
That might have been what
because
I was thinking of. Was Happy
because
Death
that's
Day?
just that's a really fun horror movie. It's a bit lighter than some of the horror movies than all of the horror movies basically that we've talked about so far. So that would be a
But
good like
it's in that cursed
introduction.
genre. It's in that cursed genre where you get cursed and you know, like you keep repeating the same day over and over again because you're trying to cheat death and you can't cheat it.
But as
Um,
far as being
so
cursed, I
yeah,
mean, there's also stuff like The Ring
yep, that's true. That's a good
or
point.
the Ring, The
Doesn't the
Grudge.
Ring have the iconic scene with like the TV screen?
Yeah,
Yeah, is
yeah.
that
No,
yeah?
I
That's what I'm
really
thinking of.
like. I've seen the first Ring and I really liked it. Drag Me to Hell is kind of recent-ish one that I've heard very good things about. Jennifer's Body's got a very like cult-ish like vibe
That's if
to
you
it.
call it horror with Megan Fox in it.
Hey, but I've heard people that really love that movie. So that's definitely one that I would like to check
Anything
out.
about a cult fascinates me because people who end up actually joining cults fascinates me. So when someone makes a movie about it, I'm like, okay, how like insane can we like make this? Because I think like the actual like realism of like there's actual events where people like did this like and then you try to make a movie off of it. I think that's always interesting, and I think that's like an interesting genre to like explore. Like one of my favorite shows all time is like The Following. It got canceled after 3 seasons, but like it followed like a cult or similar thing, kind of like that idea. So yeah, I kind of like that horror genre. Um, Mitchell, I was gonna say, should we mention movies that we are coming up, or do you want to keep going down the list of movies? Because
I mean, as
there is
far as
one movie
what's
that I'm very excited for that I think you are also excited for.
are
That I
we
hope
talking
Tommy
about?
has seen the first one.
Oh, we're
It's,
talking about Smile.
yes.
Have you
Oh,
seen Smile?
I have seen Smile.
I
Oh god.
loved
For
Smile.
me, that was a little too predictable,
Yeah, that's fair. I
but
mean,
it was a fun movie to watch.
I had such a good time watching Smile, and
same.
the sequel I think looks really good too. I was a bit like, okay, why are we having a Smile too? I just loved the first one so much, but after seeing the trailers, I just trust, and it's the same guy making it, which helps
Yeah,
as well. A lot of times it gets pawned off on someone else, and then it just kind of gets diluted down like the Paranormal Activity movies did. But this is written and directed by the exact same guy,
which is always a
and
good sign.
yeah, it's a fantastic sign. So I'm really looking forward to that one. Speak No Evil is one that maybe Blumhouse can
I
get back
mean,
on some sort of a I don't want to say win streak, but just
that's my
out of the
prediction.
out of
Is
the
that
red.
that's going to be the win streak movie? That's going to be the movie that's like, oh, this might be like a top 15 movie of the year. Like, if James McAvoy is as good as people are saying he is in this movie, like we have a chance of seeing like someone who's like going to have some very good acting chops. You know, so yeah, we'll see.
So Nosferatu is one of the movies that I'm looking forward to most for the rest of the year, and that's from the director of The Witch, The Lighthouse, The Northman, and it's definitely got a. I just watched Bram Stoker's Dracula recently, and I liked that movie, but just not as much as I really wanted to like that movie. And I'm hoping that this Nosferatu that comes out on Christmas, fittingly enough, scratches the itch that Bram Stoker's Dracula wasn't really quite able to do for me, because I thought that some of the casting choices were just bizarre. Keanu Reeves looking squarely at you,
Yep.
and it didn't really fit the mood as well because there were scenes and characters that really took me out of things.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I'm here for Nosferatu, and I think Speak No Evil, like I was saying earlier, is going to be fantastic. So I'm actually excited for like some of the horror movies that are coming up. And as we enter spooky season, I think that's
I'm
when
excited
it's
for
time
the
to
last
drop them.
Conjuring movie that's coming
The
out.
what?
The
The
last
last
what?
Conjuring movie.
Oh, Conjuring. Yeah.
I think this is supposed to be their final.
Eh,
The shirt
I
went
didn't. I
all
didn't
the
like
way
the last
back to
one.
the beginning when Mitchell was like the first movie I ever saw in theaters. That's a horror movie. Conjuring 2.
Yeah.
Circle it all the way back.
I'm sure they're not done with the spin-offs, but in terms
Yeah.
of the Ed and Lorraine Warren timeline of it all, I think they're coming to the end of it because they only worked so many cases, and that's what these movies have been heavily focused on. That they're going to be out of cases that they can actually film about. Granted, they can make stuff up after that point, but I have a feeling this might be the final one.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it should be. But that's another problem with like all these different like remakes and just like I mean, I watched a god awful horror movie on Peacock last year. That I mean, I told Mitchell I wouldn't even like waste your time like trying to watch it.
Oh, you saw
I
Winnie the Pooh?
no, not the not. I mean, that's not even count. That
It's very
doesn't count
bad.
as a movie. Yeah, that doesn't
There's
count as a
another one
movie.
coming out.
No, there
There,
is.
there
There
was one
is.
that came out this year.
There's a Peter Pan spinoff. There's
Yeah.
a Poohverse now.
Yep.
Like it's just
What the hell?
Yep.
yeah, it's bad. I will say that movie doesn't even count. I was thinking about the price we paid. Sorry to all the people that were involved in that movie, but that movie was absolute dog shit. Like that movie was terrible. Don't watch it. But like all these spin-offs and all these different stuff, like at the end of the day, like I'm gonna watch horror movies because I like the feeling it gives you, like you were talking about earlier, Tommy. But I just think there's some of the times where it's like there's a bunch of like spin-offs or like a bunch of like remakes of like all these movies where you're like I kind of wish I would just watch like the '70s original. Like if this Nosferatu movie isn't good, I'm gonna be like, oh, I'm just gonna go back to like another Nosferatu movie. Like I'm just gonna
Well,
find something else that's better.
Nosferatu was one of the earlier horror movies
20s.
ever made.
Yeah, so I'm excited. Like it should work.
So actually, I think they're making a Wolfman movie next year as
I
well. That
believe
was
they are.
also a
Yeah.
remake.
They've been trying to make that for a long time. Like I
Well,
remember Ryan Gosling was supposed to play the Wolfman, and there was a Wolfman movie about 10, 15 years ago that wasn't very good.
Well,
So
I mean, that kind of spawned out of the whole MonsterVerse attempt that Universal threw out there that crashed
that
and
was
burned,
trash.
crashed
Yeah.
and burned so fast. That was something that Tom Cruise could not keep alive to save his life.
Tom Cruise has done very little wrong as far as movies go. He is a champion for cinema, a fantastic actor, both in action and in drama, but he was not only miscast for The Mummy, but that was a horrid movie.
It,
Yeah.
I was very disappointed in the fact that one, they didn't bring Brendan Fraser back. I really hope that they do a remake or a sequel of some sort with Brendan Fraser. But the fact that you did a movie with Tom Cruise and Russell Crowe in it and it crashed and burned that badly, like what the fuck was happening
Something
behind
wrong.
the scenes?
Yeah, something went
Because
wrong.
that should have been a great movie, and it was terrible. I mean, they freaking made Russell Crowe basically into the Nick Fury of the MonsterVerse. I was down to see more Russell Crowe recruit random monsters and stuff, and I was like, it just couldn't take off.
Yeah. No, I think at the end of the day, And like I just maybe don't type stuff into Google. I just typed in like cannibal movies on Google because I was trying to find cannibal holocaust.
You don't do
And
that.
you see all these like random films, and you're like, there can't be this many films about cannibals, but there is.
There
And
are.
or
Yeah.
like I just thought about The Hills Have Eyes. Like I've never seen those movies,
There are
but I've
so many
heard
horror
like good
movies.
things about The Hills Have Eyes. Like so
There are so many horror movies out there. Just you can think of any possible scenario that could be spooky, and there's probably a movie about it.
like there's probably a movie about it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you also have the fact that so many actors have gotten their kind of jump start in their career from horror movies. I mean, think of
Yeah, that's a good point.
Friday the 13th is something I think of especially is one of Johnny
Johnny
Depp's
Depp.
first roles.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have Jamie Lee Curtis with the Halloween movies. She was a relative of one of the filmmakers, and they were just like, "Oh, she looks like she could fit into the movie. Let's put her in." And that sparked her
Because
career.
low budget. Like
Exactly.
let's just put her in.
Jennifer Aniston with one of the Leprechaun sequels.
Yep.
I can't believe she was in. I've seen one of those movies. I can't believe she was in it. It's
Yeah.
so awesome. I've also seen the spoofs of it too, where it's like the black leprechaun in the hood, like
Yeah, Leprechaun in the Hood. Yeah.
yeah, leprechaun in the hood. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, not
All
a
right,
good
well,
movie. I don't recommend. I don't recommend.
I think once we get started talking about Leprechaun in the Hood, that means it's time to wrap things up. And
actually, should we roll to the Human Centipede? Is that like the next?
No, we are
that's
not touching that
definitely
movie.
time to wrap things up.
We are
Brandon,
not touching that one.
no,
I'm
not
kidding,
today,
I'm
and
kidding.
frankly, not ever. Whatever horror movie you decide to, The Exorcist is the first one on my list that I'm going to. I know that's on HBO Max, so that's one that I'm going to try to watch by the end of the week.
Okay.
But also I've got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that's on Amazon, so I'll those are the first two on my list that I'm going to try to watch. They're also both, especially in the case of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's like an 85-minute movie. It's really short.
Yeah.
So good to
Get in, get out.
Exactly, yeah. It's a lot of good horror movies.
Slasher movies are quick. They're quick, easy
Good.
ones to get into.
Good. Marathon them, and yeah, that sounds great to me.
You might want to take them in doses. You might get fried out a little
bit. That's true.
No, give me more chainsaw.
Yeah. Can never have enough chainsaw.
We're going to see Mitchell go to fucking Home Depot the next day.
Yep. I need my own chainsaw to fiend off the other chainsaws. That's the only way you'd stop a chainsaw.
That should be the spinoff. I don't even know if they made that movie yet. But speaking of ideas,
Texas
the
Chainsaws
spinoff should be they fight with chainsaws. Like that should be the spinoff.
There was some movie where they did that, and I don't think it was even a horror movie. I think it was an action movie, but I don't remember what it was.
Fair.
So, but spooky season has begun. Thank you guys for sitting down and talking about some of the horror movies that we definitely need to be watching, and however you choose to spend your spooky season, whether it's with something of the slasher variety, whether it's something more spooky along the lines of like a Beetlejuice or something like that, or whether you're just abstaining the whole thing, enjoy the fall and not sweating your ass off so damn much. Thank you for listening.